When I reached out to you guys, as well as my Instagram audience, to find out what you wanted to learn to make from scratch, tortillas was at the top of the list. And I get it. Tortillas can be pretty tricky to make. They can end up too lopsided, too thin, too thick, too brittle, or just take forever to make. And there are a few tricks that you need to know in order to make really good tortillas. So for week 5 of the Ditch the Grocery Store Challenge, I'm going to be sharing with you my perfected process for making wonderful, soft tortillas. I'm going to be showing you how to make tortillas using a tortilla press, which is my preference. However, I'll also go through the steps of doing it by hand in case you don't have one or don't want to purchase one. It just takes a little bit longer, but both will turn out great. Then after we make the tortillas, I'm going to show you how to take those tortillas and turn them into wonderful tortilla chips so that you can check that off your grocery list as well. To make the tortilla dough, start by adding to a medium bowl 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 3/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm making a small batch today, but feel free to double or triple this recipe. Then whisk it to combine the dry ingredients. Next, add in 3 tablespoons of lard or shortening and 1 cup of hot water. The water should be as hot as will come out of your faucet and that you can comfortably work with because it's going to help melt the lard or shortening. Then either use a dough whisk or your hands to combine the ingredients well. I like to start with a dough whisk and then switch to using my hands. You can also do this whole mixing and kneading process in a stand mixer. I just don't always feel like hauling it out, and this is a pretty easy dough to make by hand. The dough will be very sticky at first. Just continue to work with it, and after a few minutes, if it's still really sticky, slowly incorporate a bit more flour until it can be worked with. Be careful not to add too much flour though. Trust that with more kneading time, it will get less sticky and easier to work with. If you do add too much flour, you'll know because it will be more difficult to roll out, and you'll find that even after letting the dough rest, it will want to shrink and curl in. Keeping the oil to flour ratio correct is going to help prevent that common problem. After the dough comes together, continue to knead for about 5 more minutes. Then take a little of your lard or shortening and lightly coat the outside of the dough ball as well as the bowl, and then place the dough back into the bowl. Cover it tightly and set it aside for about 20 minutes to rest. The time that you let it rest isn't super important as long as it's been at least 20 minutes. I often just move on to a different project and come back to it when I can. After this time is up, coat a plate or a baking dish with a little lard or shortening. Then separate the dough ball into smaller golf-sized balls. The size you pick will depend on what you plan to make with your tortillas. Golf ball size or slightly larger is about right for most purposes and fits on our tortilla press well. After you have your dough balls made, you can prep your tortilla press if you have one, or a rolling pin if you do not, and you can heat up your skillet. I like to heat my cast iron press just a bit, not to make it hot, just a bit warm, and I found that the tortilla press is way easier this way. However, you can just use it on the counter as well. Then, whether you're using the press or not, you will need 2 square pieces of parchment paper, just larger than the size you want your tortillas. Okay, I'm going to show you how to use the press, and then I'll show you how to roll it out by hand with a rolling pin. So with the press, I place 1 piece of parchment paper on the bottom of the press. I make sure my dough ball is nice and round with no seams, and then I place it in the middle of the press. Then I place the other piece of parchment paper on top, and press down firmly with the press, holding it for about 8 to 10 seconds. Then I open it, rotate the tortilla in the papers a quarter turn, and repeat the pressing for about 8 to 10 seconds. I repeat this until the tortilla has been pressed to my desired thickness and it is nice and even. Then I remove the top layer of parchment paper carefully, then transfer the tortilla over to my hot dry skillet and place the tortilla side down with the top parchment paper still attached. Have a spatula ready for this next step because as soon as the tortilla hits the pan, you need to use the spatula to remove the top parchment paper. Go slow enough not to rip any holes or anything, but work quickly so that it doesn't cook with the top on. Then let it cook for just a few seconds until you see a few bubbles or like there is hot air trapped inside. I noticed that this is kind of hard to see in the video on some of mine, and definitely some tortillas bubble up way more than others, but after you do this a few times, you will be able to tell pretty easily when this happens. Then flip the tortilla and cook the other side for just a few seconds. You don't want to overcook them because this will give you hard, brittle tortillas. As soon as it's done, transfer the tortilla to a plate lined with a towel, and then fold the towel over them, trapping the warmth and steam inside. This is also a very important step for making the tortillas nice and supple. Now I will show you how I use the same process to roll them out by hand in case you don't have a press. Place your round dough ball in the center of a piece of parchment paper, just like in the press. Lightly place the second square on top. Then, using a rolling pin, start at the center of the dough ball, press down and up, then repeat that going down, so from the center, down. Rotate your tortilla, still in the paper, and roll upwards, and then downwards again. My only real word of caution when rolling these out by hand is to be careful that you're rolling the edges thinner than the middle. If you don't pay attention to this, you're likely to end up with a thin middle that will break and too thick of edges. Trust me, I have made this mistake many times. I will say that this process is definitely an art, and not every one of my tortillas come out perfectly round or the exact same thickness, but I will say that after doing this a few times, they do all come out delicious, soft, and much better than store-bought. In fact, I have a child who thought that she just didn't like tortillas at all until she had homemade, and to this day she will only eat homemade. In her defense, it is an entirely different experience. Store-bought tortillas almost have a plasticky taste and texture, and if you have never had homemade, you're in for a real treat. Okay, as soon as the tortilla is rolled out, it can be transferred to the hot skillet just like before. Carefully remove the paper using a spatula, and then flip it as soon as it begins to bubble up. Don't worry if this process seems a little clumsy at first. You will get the hang of it after a few times, and then you will never want or see a need to buy store-bought again. Alright, next up, let's take those amazing tortillas we just made and turn them into tortilla chips. Now, small disclaimer, most tortilla chips are made with corn tortillas, and those are our preference as well, but I'm going to use our flour tortillas today since that's what I have on hand. But know that you can do this exact same process with corn tortillas. I just use a pizza cutter to slice the tortillas into triangles. You can make them whatever size you'd like. Meanwhile, I heat up about 1 inch or 2 of oil in a skillet. You can also use a deep fryer if you have one. I'm using avocado oil here in a cast iron skillet, but use whatever oil you would normally use for deep frying. If you would like to significantly lower the amount of oil you're consuming, you can bake these in an oven at 375 after rubbing with some oil and sprinkling with salt, or you can place them in an air fryer at 350 until they're brown. But I personally have zero issues with oil, and I think that deep fried tastes way better, so that's what we do. After your oil gets to about 340 to 350 Fahrenheit, toss 1 tortilla triangle in to test out the temperature. It should turn a light brown, and some will bubble up. We found that our favorites were the ones that were more brown. Some of these I took out way too early, so don't be afraid of letting them really brown up. I think I was afraid that they would get hard, forgetting that deep fried things still melt in your mouth even after browning. This is not true in an air fryer or an oven, so you may want to keep them a little lighter if you're using one of those other methods. As soon as you pull them out of the oil using tongs or something similar, transfer them to a paper towel or towel-lined plate and sprinkle both sides with salt. Then just let them cool a bit before you dive in. One warning with these is that they are very addictive, so make more than you think you are going to need, and hide them from your children if you don't want them eaten yet. I actually decided to put off making all of them until dinner because I knew we'd eat them immediately, and I was right. We finished off everything I made very quickly. Thank you so much for joining me here today for week 5 of the Ditch the Grocery Store Challenge. I hope that you'll join me again next week for week 6. And then also on Fridays, I try to put out a video each week on homesteading, homeschooling, and food from scratch. So I hope that you'll join me there too.